Welcome to Letter to Louie. Welcome, Abby.
Thank you.
You are Dr. Algiers' daughter, and you're here today to continue his legacy. He was able to share a lot of information to our viewers about our community, and in that way that he did that was he wrote a letter to his good friend Louie. So I asked you to come here today to continue on with this, and let's let our viewers know your father has passed, and that's been a very traumatic thing, not only for yourself and your family, but a lot of our community members really do miss him. So I appreciate you coming in to continue his legacy.
Thank you.
And I know that you are a writer as well as having a blog, and on that blog, if you will, you put in one of the last interviews, if you will, with your father about COVID and his take on that. And you brought in some of the questions that you asked him and actually the interview, and I'd like to share that with our viewers if you would like to read that to us.
Yes, definitely. So. And I think, too, that the way I interviewed him was really a sign of the times and a sign of COVID, because he was at the Catholic home and I was in my home, so it was completely over the phone.
Okay.
So, it wasn't in person.
Wow.
It was a true COVID interview.
Sure.
Which made it more impactful.
Yeah. So what month was this?
This was at the end of April.
Okay, April 2020.
Yep.
All right. And so in talking with your father, it'll be interesting to hear his take on this, having seen a lot in his medical career.
Correct. And even before things got really serious at the end of April, he was, at the beginning of the year, he was just saying, I think this is going to be trouble. He predicted it early on in January.
Wow.
Sort of warned us all that he didn't like what he saw coming.
Okay.
So
what did you ask him, and we'll go through the interview.
Okay, great. All right, so my first question, I said, Dad, your parents survived the Spanish flu and the Great Depression. You served in World War II, and you've lived through many devastating world events. What do you make of the situation we're in now? He said, it's messed up. You can spell that mess in any way you like. It's a very discouraging time, and we don't know how to respond to a problem such as we're faced with. We've never had to think about a worldwide response. Although many people, many serious thinkers have talked about something like this, no one listened to them. And even those serious thinkers didn't allow themselves to think in depth or truly consider what it would mean to have a complete world shut down and a source of utter confusion. We just have never allowed ourselves to do that. We thought it couldn't happen, but now we find out it has happened and we're in trouble, big time trouble.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I could see why, with the experience that he had with his parents, why he would say we're in big time trouble.
Correct.
So going on in the interview, what else have you asked him?
Well, I was really interested to find out what the other members of the independent senior living community that he was living in, he and my mom, thought about it. So I asked him how it's affected those people. They were at the Catholic home in Milwaukee.
Okay.
And he said, there are just no human beings who have had normal thoughts since this started. No normal thoughts. Nobody has really allowed themselves to imagine something like this. The elderly still cannot believe it's happening. We aren't allowing ourselves, and then he tapped the phone when he said that to emphasize. And in the moments where we do allow ourselves to think about it, we just can't believe that the world which we knew had a chance of exploding did explode onto and into itself. It just seems to be incomprehensible. It doesn't seem possible. Although my generation has gone through heaven, hell, and purgatory in response to World War II, typhoons, terrible storms, and previous epidemics, this is so much different. This is something that we've never allowed ourselves to think down and think through. It's exemplified by not knowing how to address the element of society that says to hell with it. We're just going to live through it as though nothing is happening. There's an element that thinks it doesn't exist. That element has always been around. It's a group of hard-nosed people who will never accept reality, and if they accept it, they will object to it. It is going to be an element which will prove to be a greater problem than the problem itself. Their lack of cooperation and their obvious disbelief of what's happening is going to prove to be a very, very difficult situation for younger people and the older people to manage. There's always been an element of radical people, and it's just going to be redneck terrible.
Wow. Wow, I can hear his voice.
I can too. And I can
Okay.
definitely. He was getting fired up at this point.
Okay.
Okay. And then I talked about his family had lived through the time of polio, and actually my dad's brother had polio. So I asked him what that was like. And he said, times like these leave lifelong imprints in one's memory and affect the course of their lives. By that I mean, take for instance, awakening one morning and finding your brother sleeping next to you, moaning and crying in his sleep, as he realizes he cannot move his leg, and as he tries, he has exquisite, devastating, unrelenting pain. That was the awakening on a November day many years ago when my brother developed acute paralytic polio. He was powerless to do anything about it. It was beside himself to accept that he probably had polio. He was smart enough to know that it was a terrible, life-changing moment for himself. I well remember that he said something to me to the effect of, "But you don't realize what I fear. You don't realize that it's my leg that isn't moving and that it's so painful. We walked in the woods yesterday afternoon and enjoyed the day. Today I can't move my toes. Today I can't move my leg. I think I have polio." And he was so right. It was a life-changing moment. He had no alternative but to have insightful acceptance, and he had hopeful probability that he was wrong. He cried, and he was right for the next 75 years that his life had changed. He had changed overnight, from the sunshine of a fall day to the depths of despair of reality. That 24 hours changed the life of our family completely, irretrievably, and definitely for the next 90 years. We in the family became aware of such terms as quarantine, South Milwaukee Contagion Hospital, and polio, and the wonderment as to whether he would return or not. That was the COVID destination of infectious disease of 1943, not nearly as infectious as COVID of 2020. It was not as devastating as we are coming to realize the present illness has been, will be, and when understood, will be as difficult to accept as the polio of the 1940s. I well remember the debates, the explanations of causality by a filterable virus, and how finally mankind began to develop awareness and eventual well-thought-out solutions. But during the process, there were so many people who failed to accept the presence of the disease, the annual fear of the disease reoccurrence, and the potential each year that we may be victims thereof. This process of eventual solution of each and every of the disease, prevention, acceptance, and annual fear continued each and every fall from September until the first hard frost. The annual fear was real. The changing fear of COVID is real. We must accept the presence of the disease and the potential for utter devastation. This is the time for cooperative action, not bullheaded defiance.
Wow.
Yeah, again, he was very,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Absolutely. That's, for me, being able to reflect on the years of polio and not knowing if they did fear that every year, that totally makes sense.
Right.
That makes a lot of sense, and I wonder if that's what we're going to be experiencing with this particular virus.
Right, because I think people think that things are just going to change quickly. You know,
Right.
we'll go back to a new normal, but I think it's going to be an ongoing evolution of normal.
Yeah. Okay, and were there other questions you had?
There were a couple more, yeah. I had asked him to compare the time of COVID that we were going through to World War II, just to get that perspective.
Yes.
And he said, this is different from World War II. During World War II, we all came together. We fought together and worked together. We were united. Now we're alone, totally isolated. I've never seen anything like it. We'll get through it by facing it. The greatest problem is to say it doesn't exist. The greatest hindrance is understanding itself. The greatest difficulty is going to be the awakening that something catastrophic has occurred. We have to accept the fact that we've just had a problem that we've never had before. If mankind is to exist, mankind has got to adjust. During World War II, we feared the unknown and fear itself. We didn't know what to fear, we were just frightened. The unknown proved not to be nearly as fearful as the present year of COVID. This is multiple times more severe, more fearful, more real. It's more real than the devastation annually of the polio virus. What we are going through now is unknown to mankind. And one wonders how we will eventually cooperate, if we are going to cooperate, to the ideas of infection, infection control, and terrible, terrible consequences to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. This is serious. We need to ask ourselves, just how can we accept the concept of such a dynamic new threat that is and will shake up the world?
Wow.
Yeah.
Amazing insight.
I know. It was
know,
just, and it just...
And knowledge. I mean,
Right,
you know.
right.
He's talking science. He's not just talking, what he's feeling. This is facts.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it was still, I mean, it wasn't early on, but it was, late April before a lot was known about the disease. So it was still very insightful as to how things would progress and the severity of it.
Wow. Okay. And you had a few more? I
A
think?
few
I don't know
more,
how
yes.
many you have.
This is a good one. I asked what his advice would be for us as we move through the pandemic.
Yes.
And he said, what we're going through now demonstrates that there is a control mechanism above and beyond us, and we had better recognize that there is a higher presence so that we can begin to live, to understand, and to develop. We've all been granted time to sort of be punks. Now we've got to be mature punks. It's time for the world to grow up a bit, starting from ground zero. Only the mature people will be able to truly help the situation by accepting the fact that everyone has got to face the problems and do their small tasks every day. Only by everybody cooperating can the race continue. It's time for everybody to grow up overnight. This is your Pearl Harbor. This is your time to stand up and be counted along with the historians and along with the people who have always been talking in the past about Pearl Harbor. The bottom line is we have to recognize that everyone is confused. Everyone needs help. Help begins with kindness and understanding and cooperation between families and between groups of people. Cooperation is necessary, and if we don't have it, we'll get by, but it will be much more difficult. But if everyone cooperates, it'll be easier. And then I asked him, kind of getting back to that normal concept, I asked him, how can we look at life differently when life returns to normal? And he said, we aren't going to have any choice. It is different. It will be different. Accept the fact that it's different. It causes people to act responsibly. People must act responsibly and cooperate. Help your neighbor next door. It's time to recognize what being a neighbor really means. And he said, take your time to allow yourself to think that recreation is all right, even in the depths of tremendous anxiety. If you can just allot a little bit of time for pure recreation, you'll experience spiritual regeneration, and spiritual regeneration means recognition of your being. Do some activity you enjoy. Keep that 5-iron next to the door with balls so that when things are really tough, you can hit that sucker so you feel better. Just hit some and you'll feel better. Finally, know that you're going to find out that you can be serious just so long. Seriousness has to be broken up by action, and humanity needs to realize that we're all in it together. If we recognize that by helping someone else, we're helping ourselves, we can get by. It's so important to help the person next door, because soon you find out that when you're helping the widow next door, she's making cookies the next day. It's a chain reaction. We've got to help each other. Be aware, be cooperative, understand that it is happening, and we never have experienced disease of this magnitude before. The question of survival of the species is very real. Most importantly, we've got to keep the faith.
Yeah, absolutely. Very good point. I think that
Yeah.
he really hit it before, like you said, it completely, all the numbers were out. He had this already.
Right.
And I think experiencing what he experienced in his lifetime helped him come to an understanding of what's happening and what we're going to be limited as far as being able to function outside of our
Right.
homes.
Right, right. And also the understanding, I think he just had a great understanding of people, and he can look at people, and he knew that there's a segment of population that's not going to take it seriously, and it needs to be taken seriously was his message.
Right, right, by
For
all,
sure.
by all people.
Right,
Whatever
right.
group that is, whatever.
Right,
Your
right.
age is, this is real and it's happening.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. Okay. Wow, that was a great interview you had with him. I didn't know if you had any other last questions with him that you wanted to bring up.
This was the meat of the interview,
Okay.
but he just really throughout the whole time he had been talking about it, and just really was just very devastated that it was happening, and it was
Okay.
just, it just highlighted the fact that there are so many people that are isolated from their family members, and it's just that's the hard part of the situation, the
Right.
reality
Right.
of protecting our elderly, and
Mhm.
that population is also very devastating.
Yes, because as, in the past, when I would speak with your father, we talked about his aging process and how he was losing friends. Just, again, a normal cycle, we're living longer.
Right.
And how difficult that was, and then to put a virus out there, really isolating people more. And I think that his point of being neighborly and helping your neighbors, and whether that's situational where you live or just people that you see, I think he meant neighborly as a, not just actual street that you live on.
Right,
Yeah.
right, exactly,
Yeah. So,
exactly. And too, especially in the nursing homes and the senior centers and the hospitals, I just would give the staff at those homes so much credit,
Yes.
because they have the opportunity to help the people that are so isolated, and just to show those people kindness too, and thank them for what they're doing.
Absolutely, absolutely. Now, you have all the letters that your dad wrote to Louie.
Correct.
And he started that process of writing to Louie, do you know how long ago?
I think about 15 years ago.
Okay. All right. And
Yes.
Louie was his childhood friend
Yes,
here in Hartford.
correct.
Yeah. And today you brought in what you believe is the last letter that he wrote to Louie while living in Hartford. And I'm going to have you read that at the podium for us,
Okay.
just like your father would have.
Okay.
So if you'd like to step
Great.
up there.
Sure. So this letter was a letter I found in my dad's. He's got 3 big binders full of all of his letters. So there are plenty of letters to Louie. And this one was written in April of 2017, when my mom and dad were moving from Hartford to Milwaukee to the Catholic home to begin living there. So I think he thought it was going to be his final letter to Louie, so that's why it has this tone. It was his final letter written in Hartford, so that's a little backdrop to the letter. Dear Louie, sorry to say, Louie, but this is the last of the formal letters in the series of letters to Louie. As you, of all people, are aware, times have and are changing. You have passed and are in the land of the great beyond. I hope all is well. We here, Dorothy and I, are going through a great change. We are leaving Hartford, our home for our entire lives, except for a few years during medical school. We are leaving with mixed emotions, and one of the psychological downers is the cessation of letters to Louie. So Louie, I believe one more letter to Louie is in order, a review of some of the best letters to Louie. It would be interesting to know if anyone recalls the review articles, but perhaps some in our audience have enjoyed an occasional letter to Louie. Really, Louie, I have been reading and talking ideas, some good, some fair, and some poor for at least 15 years, all with the tolerance of Sally and Jack. Some of the talks have been real bummers, some fair, but all were of interest, at least to me, and I hope to the audience. So today, I would like to review some of the best of Louie. Of all the articles with a medical theme, the best was the recall of the 18-year-old boy who was involved in an auto crash in the midst of a sleet storm, and of his hospitalization for a month, of multiple surgical procedures and his eventual death. The theme, however, was not of the auto tragedy and his death. There were so many at the time of License to Drink and Drive, but of how he was adopted by the Mother Superior of the hospital and how she became his only avenue of help until he died. His 30 Days I Knew George was the best piece I have ever written. I so well remember George. We wrote of medical topics, the decline of polio and the ravages of that disease in the 60s, the fear of all mothers during the polio season of September of each year until the vaccine was developed. We recalled how Hartford received the greatest share of immune globulin when we had 2 cases of polio, and with that, the possibility of an epidemic was probably reduced. A most interesting time. Along with the medical topics, we recalled some tragic, some funny episodes of medical care in the 50s and 60s. We spoke and wrote of the helmet equation of Harley riders and how the problem of head injuries still persists with or without helmets. On one occasion, we reviewed the deaths from carbon monoxide intoxication seen in the Hartford area. All preventable, all tragic. We spoke of coronary artery disease, addressed the local response, the development of the 4-bed ICU in the 70s. We demonstrated and described the newer surgical procedures for treatment of obstructive arterial bilateral aortic heart disease. And importantly, with the officers of the police department, the immediate response to the collapse and chest pain was discussed. The initial first responder concept was developed by the police department, and one of its officers was the first responder concept in the area, a great success. Immediate defibrillation was developed by the police department. Another topic, Alzheimer's disease, was discussed in a few letters to you and is one of the last letters we suggested the continual hope of control. During the years, the political scene was discussed with a program or two, but the program never became political in nature. The amazing civic support of the Recreation Department, of the Shower Center, of the Jack Russell Library, and most recently of the Aquatic Center was noted with special recognition for each project. We never addressed the politics behind the support, but that topic might have been most germane. Politics in a smaller community always has its intrigue and sometimes suspense. Usually a beer or two helps to establish the equanimity and peace in the community. Depression and other mental disease were discussed in one letter to you, Louie, the incident of an Easter auto accident and the uncomfortable attachment of the patient from Illinois to the physician was mentioned. There are uncomfortable consequences at times in the practice of medicine. The changing political scene in the country was never discussed. The author felt, quote, not up to the issues. We did discuss in one or two of the letters the problems of the aging population and the dependency of the aged for care as time and medical circumstance declare increasing disability. We addressed care of the aging population and had no answers to this increasing problem. And often, and with increasing frequency of late, we wrote to you of the loss of friends, a progressive loss so that now, in our class of 44, one is hard-pressed to find an operating cell phone of a class member. All have been more or less terminated. And so, Louie, until we meet again, Jim A.
Well, that was a wonderful letter. I mean, I could just feel his presence here and how much it meant to him to be able to have the knowledge and the ability to be able to give this to Louie and to our community. I mean, he really put a lot of thought into each letter that he wrote, and any time that he would be in here, well prepared and just really spoke eloquently.
Well, I know that he so enjoyed coming here to talk to you and to do these interviews. He would, in his binders, there's also notes, just, I'll ask Sally about this, or, just, he was planning the letters for so long, and he just, he really did enjoy it so much.
Well, I appreciate you coming in and continuing on with his legacy.
Yes.
So thank you,
Thank
Abby.
you. Look forward to it.
And to our viewers, as always, thank you for watching.